Capcom has been insanely consistent with Resident Evil for nearly a decade now, which is a great change of pace for a franchise that is not known for its consistency. Resident Evil was in a really rocky place after the Xbox 360 generation, but RE7 got everything back on track, and Capcom followed it up with a great direct sequel in the form of RE Village, as well as a few incredible remakes with RE2, RE3, and Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 9 is the next installment in the Resident Evil franchise, and Capcom has been cooking on that project for quite a while now. And recently we got some big leaks regarding RE9 that were revealed by an insider. And with the summer game showcases coming up, when are we getting the big reveal for Resident Evil 9? We're going to talk about that and so much more, so check the video chapters for easy viewing, and let's get started. So first things first, we have to talk about our latest leak from Dusk Golem regarding the perspective of Resident Evil 9. As you know, RE7 was the first mainline Resident Evil game to use a first-person perspective camera, and then that perspective was carried into Resident Evil Village, but basically every other game in the series utilizes a third-person perspective. And since the third-person remakes of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 have been so successful, this of course has raised a few questions as to what direction Capcom is going in with Resident Evil 9's perspective. Will it be first person or will it be third person? Well, according to Dusk Golem, Resident Evil 9 is going to be using a third person perspective, and there might be an optional first person mode for you to turn on if you really want to. But the game is being designed as a third person experience through and through, which means it will likely feel more similar to Resident Evil 4 than Resident Evil 7 or 8. Now, this information ties into many of the rumors that we've heard recently about Resident Evil 9 being another soft reboot of the franchise. For those of you that don't know, Resident Evil has been rebooted a few times throughout the years. Now, the original RE4 is widely seen as a reboot of the franchise since it was such a dark change in tone and gameplay from everything that came before it. And Resident Evil 7 is pretty obviously a reboot as well, since it featured a brand new camera perspective and totally new gameplay style, as well as a story that had barely anything to do with the established canon. According to many inside sources, Capcom is planning on doing the same thing with RE9, featuring a brand new style of gameplay and a narrative that is mostly disconnected from everything that's come before it, although there will be reportedly several returning characters and the plot will still take place in the established canon. You just won't need any prior knowledge in order to follow along with what's happening, similar to the stories of RE4 and RE7. This brings us to Resident Evil 9's open world. Now, several inside sources have also claimed recently that Resident Evil 9 is going to feature elements of open world gameplay, which could end up being a really cool evolution of the formula or a massive mistake. Now, I should be clear that the reports say it will feature open world elements and not technically be a proper open world game, but every leaker has one thing in common, in that they agree that this will be the biggest Resident Evil game to date, and the gameplay is going to be the most open-ended it's ever been. Resident Evil has dabbled with open world elements in the past, but usually the further Capcom is willing to go is more of a Metroidvania style approach to map design. RE4 and RE Village both have some open-ended areas that you can explore at your own pace, but they are nowhere near proper open world sections. So from the gist of these reports, what I'm gathering is that Resident Evil 9 is basically taking the formula of Resident Evil Village to the next logical step, meaning it will likely be built out of several large open-ended areas, but those areas will not be interconnected like other traditional open world games. So basically this Resident Evil game will be structured more like Dark Souls 1 or Jedi Fallen Order, or even the recent Atomfall, where you go from one open-ended level to the next, but there are still things you need to do to go from one level to the other. Now, personally, I'm on the fence about this. Now, on one hand, I think it's going to be really neat to see Resident Evil on such a large scale, but on the other hand, I'm also worried that by giving the player more space to move around and explore, it's going to result in a story losing a lot of its urgency, and Capcom won't be able to make curated moments that the franchise is known for. Now, it's not saying that they can't make it happen. They certainly could, and all it really takes is good development and good ideas for that to work. But just think about all of the most memorable moments from Resident Evil's history. Almost none of those moments would be possible if the developers weren't able to guarantee that you were experiencing the world at the pace in which they intended you to. And there's nothing wrong with the way that Resident Evil has been structured in the past, obviously, and there's also nothing wrong with them making a bigger game. But I do worry that by making the game world bigger, Capcom is also going to end up making Resident Evil a lot less exciting, since the pace is naturally going to be slower and less horror driven than before. I think it really just comes down to this. this. You can't be as scary in an open world environment as you can in a linear one, and unless Capcom's developers have figured out some new crazy way to make a horror game, I am a little worried that the open world influences are going to be detrimental to the experience overall. Again, I'm not saying that the developers aren't geniuses, they could probably make it work, but that will require a lot of innovation. Now, you may be a little confused as to how Capcom even started working on an open world Resident Evil game in the first place, but a report recently came out about the game's development and origins that shines some light on where the idea came from. Well, according to Dusk Golem, Resident Evil 9 actually started work as an entirely different project. And if this report is to be believed, Resident Evil 9 actually started development as an open world multiplayer game, with work that began all the way back in 2017. According to Dusk Golem, they then said, Resident Evil 7's initially underwhelming sales prompted Capcom to try and do something totally different with the Resident Evil franchise, which is understandable since RE7 was a series reboot, and since the initial sales weren't amazing, Capcom likely figured it was time to just go crazy with the IP and do something totally unexpected. But over time, positive word of mouth greatly increased, and the number of RE7 copies were sold to the point that the game had sold over 14 million copies, which is one of the highest sales counts in the entire series, and Capcom took note of this and started to reconsider taking the franchise to a multiplayer focused direction, and around 2021, the project was completely rebooted into a single player game, and all the multiplayer aspects were completely dropped. Now, the leaker also stated that due to this major reboot in development, a ton of previous RE9 leaks and rumors are now inaccurate. Apparently, some things that have been leaked in the past were actually true at some point, but Resident Evil 9's post-reboot is very different from the RE9 that was leaking a few years ago. For example, the original version of the game apparently did star Leon and Jill as the main characters, and they were going to be trapped on a fictional island based on Singapore, but following the development reboot, that's no longer the setting. Now, Dusk Golem then said on Twitter that Leon will be the main character for the new game. So now the question is when will Capcom officially reveal Resident Evil 9? Obviously, we heard that Resident Evil 9 is confirmed. We heard that from Capcom themselves, so at least we don't have to speculate on that. Now, we don't actually know the name, whether it's going to be Resident Evil 9 or if it's going to be Roman numerals IX. Now, there's no way to know for sure, though I do have to mention that previous leaks and rumors have suggested that the game will be revealed and announced this summer and then released sometime in 2026. Now, with that being said, we have Summer Game Fest that is confirmed on June 6th. And if you look at the graphic that showcases all of the developers and publishers that will be featured in Summer Game Fest, well, if you look at that graphic, you can see that Capcom is very clearly there. Now, it's also worth mentioning that if you look at the Resident Evil 4 remake video posted in late April, there's what seems to be a teaser that showcases an IX in that video, which the IX being 9 in Roman numerals, so perhaps that was a teaser for the announcement this year. Honestly, I think them doing something for Summer Game Fest would be a good idea, but there is also the other possibility that they decide to wait until a PlayStation showcase, perhaps a state of play or an official showcase, which there are rumors that a state of play will be happening near June. And if that's the case, then Resident Evil 9 will likely get revealed during that event. Now, we could get just like a random Capcom showcase this year as well, which that might be actually preferred for them, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that it's either going to be Summer Game Fest or it'll be during a PlayStation state of play. Now, in terms of when this thing is going to release, obviously we know that GTA 6 is releasing May of next year. So if I was Capcom, I would start marketing this game now and then try to release the game before GTA 6 is out, because if you try to release near GTA 6, that's probably not the best idea. I mean, yeah, the audiences are different, but still, they're going to want to maximize all the hype and stuff for themselves. So if they release it near GTA 6, then unfortunately that game will likely overshadow Resident Evil 9. Now, it could be that they push things back deliberately and they just kind of wait and then reveal Resident Evil 9 during the Game Awards and then release it, you know, sometime in late 2026 and then just kind of fully avoid the GTA 6 launch window. That's probably the smartest decision, but who knows? Either way though, guys, that's going to wrap it up with this video. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel with your notifications turned on, and until next time, this has been Wes, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.